My name's Cindy, and I've always loved working with flowers. I've been working at Bloom and Blossom, one of the biggest flower shops in town, for about 3 years when it happened. It was a busy Wednesday afternoon. I was helping an elderly lady choose a centerpiece for her granddaughter's graduation party when I noticed him. Tall, with wavy brown hair and kind eyes, he was standing in front of the roses, looking completely lost. As soon as I finished with the elderly lady, I walked over to him. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, putting on my best customer service smile. He turned to me, relief washing over his face. "God, yes, please. I'm trying to find the perfect bouquet for my mom's birthday, but I'm totally clueless." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Well, you've come to the right place. Tell me a bit about your mom. What kind of flowers does she like?" We spent the next half hour picking out the perfect combination of flowers. As we worked, we chatted about everything from our favorite movies to our childhood pets. His name was Mark, and he worked at his family's furniture company. As I handed him the finished bouquet, our fingers brushed, and I felt a little spark. Our eyes met, and for a moment, we just stood there. "So, Mark started, clearing his throat. "I know this might sound weird, but would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime?" I felt my cheeks heat up. "I'd like that," I said, smiling. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Mark. There was something so sweet about how worried he'd been about choosing the right flowers for his mom. I wondered what she was like, this woman who inspired such devotion in her son. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Mark and I went on several dates, and I found myself falling for him hard and fast. He was kind, funny, and attentive. When he talked about his work at the furniture company, his eyes would light up with passion. But whenever the conversation turned to his family, especially his mother, Mark would get a bit tense. He'd change the subject or give vague answers. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Everyone has some family drama, right? About a month into our relationship, Mark invited me to a family dinner. "I want you to meet my parents," he said, looking nervous. "Especially my mom. She's eager to meet you." The day I met Mark's mother, Patricia, is etched in my memory like a bad tattoo. I spent hours getting ready, wanting to make the best impression possible. I even made a special bouquet as a gift, using the finest flowers from our shop. The moment Patricia opened the door, I felt a chill. She was immaculately dressed, not a hair out of place, with sharp eyes that seemed to x-ray me on the spot. "So, this is the florist," she said, her tone making florist sound like a dirty word. "Come in, dear. Let's have a look at you." I held out the bouquet. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Johnson. I brought these for you." She took the flowers, barely glancing at them. I suppose they'll do for the guest bathroom." Mark's father, Robert, was quieter, shaking my hand with a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mark's older brother, Tom, just nodded in my direction. During dinner, Patricia dominated the conversation. She talked about the furniture company, their high-profile clients, their plans for expansion. The men at the table stayed mostly silent, only speaking when Patricia directed a question at them. "So, Cindy," Patricia said suddenly, fixing me with her gaze. "Tell me about your career plans." I swallowed hard. "Well, I love working with flowers. I've been at Bloom and Blossom for a few years now, and—" "A few years?" Patricia interrupted. "And you're still just arranging bouquets? Don't you have any ambition, dear?" I felt my cheeks burn. "I'm actually training to become a manager." "A manager of a flower shop," Patricia scoffed. "How quaint. In this family, we believe in real business. Mark, darling, perhaps you could find Cindy a position in our company? A woman in this family needs to understand real work. Now, about the wedding." I nearly choked on my water. "Wedding? But we've only been dating for a few months." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "My dear, if you're going to be part of this family, you need to understand how things work. I make the decisions here. Your job is to support Mark and contribute to the family business. Is that clear? In the car, I turned to Mark, still in shock. Your mother, she's very strong-willed, Mark finished. Yeah, I know. But she means well. She just wants what's best for the family. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But as I lay in bed that night, Patricia's cold eyes and cutting words kept replaying in my mind. I had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning of my troubles with Mark's mother. Then came the wedding plans. Despite my protests, Patricia steamrolled ahead, deciding everything from the venue to the guest list. But Mrs. Johnson, I tried to argue one day, shouldn't Mark and I have a say in our own wedding? She fixed me with that icy stare. Cindy, dear, you clearly don't understand how things work in high society. This wedding isn't just about you and Mark. It's about the family's reputation. Now, be a good girl and leave the planning to those who know best. I felt like I was losing control of my own life. But I loved Mark, and I kept telling myself that things would get better after the wedding. Once we had our own place, surely Patricia's influence would lessen. The wedding was exactly as Patricia wanted it, lavish, extravagant, and completely devoid of any personal touches from Mark or me. As I walked down the aisle in the designer dress Patricia had chosen, I felt more like a prop in her show than a bride on her wedding day. Our honeymoon was cut short by an urgent call from Patricia about some business matter that apparently couldn't wait. And when we returned, the real nightmare began. Patricia's influence seeped into every aspect of our lives. She'd show up unannounced at our new apartment, criticizing everything from my cooking to the way I folded Mark's shirts. Every day, Patricia found new ways to belittle me and undermine my confidence. The worst part was her constant harping about my job. A florist, she'd sneer. It's time you quit that silly little job and started working for the family business. How else will you learn to be a proper part of this family? I stood my ground on this issue. My job at the flower shop was the one thing that was truly mine, the one place where I felt competent and valued. But my resistance only seemed to fuel Patricia's determination. I tried to tell Mark about these skirmishes, but he brushed it off. Mom's just protective, Cindy. She'll come around eventually. Just try to make an effort, okay? But no matter how hard I tried, nothing was ever good enough for Patricia. Every family gathering became an ordeal. Patricia would hold court, making snide remarks about my background, my job, even my appearance. The worst was when Patricia would bring up Tom's ex-wife, Angela. Now there was a girl who knew her place, Patricia would say, staring pointedly at me. It's a shame she turned out to be so disappointing. But I took care of that, didn't I, Tom? Tom would just nod silently, a haunted look in his eyes. I couldn't help but wonder what had really happened to Angela, and if I was headed for a similar fate. As the months wore on, I felt increasingly isolated and trapped. Patricia's control over Mark seemed absolute. He'd jump at her every command, canceling our plans or working late at her whim. Mark, please, I begged one night after he'd missed our anniversary dinner because Patricia had called him into the office. Can't you see what she's doing? She's trying to control our lives. But Mark just sighed. Cindy, you don't understand. This is just how my family works. Mom's in charge, and that's that. It's easier if you just accept it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I'd fallen in love with, the one who'd been so sweet and caring, seemed to have disappeared, replaced by this spineless mama's boy. Patricia's birthday arrived, and with it came a sense of dread I couldn't shake. The party was in full swing. Patricia held court in the living room, surrounded by fawning relatives and business associates. She was in her element, tossing out backhanded compliments and thinly veiled insults with equal glee. Oh, Martha dear, that dress is so brave of you. I'd never have the courage to wear something so youthful at our age, she crowed, making the poor woman squirm. I watched, bewildered, as the adults around her laughed and nodded along. How could they just stand there and take this? It was like watching a group of trained seals barking on command. "Cindy," Patricia's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. "Make yourself useful and bring out the cake. Put the candles on too, if you think you can manage that." Grateful for the excuse to escape, I hurried to the kitchen. The cake was enormous, a towering monstrosity of fondant and sugar flowers. I carefully placed the candles, double-checking the number. Back in the living room, I set the cake down in front of Patricia. She made a show of counting the candles, her eyes narrowing. "What's this?" she snapped. "There's one too many. Can't you even count properly? Or perhaps you think I'm older than I am?" She began plucking out the candles one by one, tossing them aside. "Look at how you've ruined the decorations. Bend down and see the mess you've made." Mortified, I leaned in to look at the cake. Suddenly, I felt a hand on the back of my head, shoving me down hard. My face hit the cake with a soft splat, and I felt the icing filling my nose and mouth. Panic set in as I struggled to breathe. Patricia's hand held me there for what felt like an eternity. When she finally let go, I jerked back, gasping and spluttering. The room erupted in laughter, Patricia's cackle the loudest of all. "Oh, Cindy dear, you should see your face," she held. "I guess you wanted a piece of cake that badly, huh?" I blinked through the frosting, searching desperately for Mark. Our eyes met for a brief moment before he looked away, his face a mask of discomfort. "Mark," I choked out, "please." He stepped forward, taking my arm. "Let's get you cleaned up," he muttered, leading me out of the room. The sound of laughter followed us down the hall. In the bathroom, I scrubbed at my face, fighting back tears. "Mark, how could she do that? How can you let her treat me this way?" He handed me a towel, not meeting my eyes. "Come on, Cindy. Mom's just a bit eccentric. You know how she gets at parties." She didn't mean anything by it. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Without a word, I pushed past him and headed for the bedroom where we'd left our overnight bags. I threw my things into my purse, my hands shaking. "Cindy, what are you doing?" Mark asked from the doorway. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I can't do this anymore. You stay, Mark. I'm sure she'll be thrilled to have you all to herself." With that, I stormed out of the house, ignoring the curious looks from the other guests. As I drove away, I could see Mark in the rearview mirror, standing in the driveway looking lost. The days following Patricia's birthday party were tense. Mark and I barely spoke. I threw myself into my work at the flower shop, finding solace in the simple beauty of my arrangements. Then, about a week after the party, my phone rang. Patricia's name flashed on the screen. With a deep breath, I answered. "Cindy, dear," her saccharine voice oozed through the speaker. "I've been thinking. It's time you quit that little hobby of yours and come work for the family business. I've got a position all lined up for you." I gripped the phone tighter. "Mrs. Johnson, I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy where I am. I have no intention of quitting my job." Her tone turned icy. "Don't be foolish, girl. This isn't a request. You will quit that job and come work where I can keep an eye on you. Do you understand?" "No, Mrs. Johnson," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "I won't. Goodbye." I hung up, my heart pounding. For a few days, everything was quiet. Too quiet. I should have known Patricia wouldn't give up so easily. It was a busy Saturday at the shop when she walked in. She browsed for a while, then approached the counter with a bouquet. Then she suddenly started screaming. "These flowers are atrocious. You've ruined all the plants in my house with your insect-infested flowers. And your service is appalling. I demand to speak to your manager." My coworkers and other customers watched in shock as Patricia ranted and raved. Finally, my manager, Dave, came out from the back. "Ma'am, please calm down," he said, trying to placate her. "I'm sure we can sort this out." As he led Patricia to his office, I sank onto a nearby stool, my legs shaky. This couldn't be happening. An hour later, Dave called me into his office. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Look, Cindy, I don't know what's going on with your family, but I can't have it spilling over into the workplace. We've received numerous complaint emails about you over the past week." "But those can't be real," I protested. "It's her, my mother-in-law, setting me up." Dave held up a hand. "I'm sorry, Cindy, but I can't ignore this many complaints. I'm going to have to let you go." That night, I cried myself to sleep, Mark's attempts at comfort feeling hollow and insincere. The next few weeks were a blur of job applications and rejections. It seemed Patricia's influence reached further than I'd realized. Finally, my friend Sarah offered me a temporary position at her wedding planning company. As I arranged flowers for other brides, I couldn't help but think of my own wedding, how Patricia had controlled every aspect of it. As Thanksgiving approached, I felt a growing sense of dread. The thought of facing Patricia again, especially after losing my job, made my stomach churn. But Mark insisted we go, as always. So there we were, seated around Patricia's ostentatious dining table, surrounded by relatives who seemed oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. Patricia, as usual, dominated the conversation, her voice grating on my already frayed nerves. Then, she turned her attention to me. "So, Cindy dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "when are you planning on giving Mark a child? You've been married for how long now? Don't tell me you're having problems in that department?" I clenched my fists under the table, fighting back tears. Patricia knew how much I wanted a child, how devastated I'd been by our struggles to conceive. And here she was, using it as a weapon in front of everyone. "What's the matter, Cindy?" Patricia sneered. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you just too incompetent to manage this too?" Something inside me snapped. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That's enough," I said, my voice shaking. "I will not sit here and let you discuss my personal health issues like this. I'm leaving this house where I'm clearly not respected." The room fell silent, everyone staring at me in shock. Even Patricia seemed taken aback by my outburst. As I turned to leave, I brushed past Patricia. Suddenly, I felt a searing pain on my arm and chest. I screamed, realizing in horror that Patricia had accidentally spilled her scalding hot tea on me. Through the haze of pain, I heard gasps and exclamations. I stumbled towards the bathroom, desperate to get the burning clothes off my skin. As I reached for the door, I felt a vice-like grip on my wrist. Patricia leaned in close, her voice a menacing whisper. "Listen here, you little brat. You will obey me, and you will never contradict me again. Otherwise, I will destroy every aspect of your pathetic little life. Understood?" I yanked my hand away, my heart pounding. "Mark!" I cried out, panic rising in my throat. "Mark, please help me." But when I turned, I saw my husband standing in the hallway, his face pale and conflicted. He mumbled something unintelligible and retreated into another room, leaving me alone with his mother's threats ringing in my ears. Somehow, I made it to the hospital. The doctor treated my burns, assuring me they weren't severe, just painful. When I finally got home, exhausted and sore, the house was empty. There was a text from Mark, staying at Mom's for a few days. "She's upset. Give her time to calm down." I stared at the message, disbelief turning to anger. This was it. This was the final betrayal. My husband, the man who had vowed to love and protect me, had chosen his mother over me yet again. I was lying on the couch, nursing my burns and my broken heart, when the doorbell rang. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. I wasn't in any state to deal with visitors. But something made me open the door. To my surprise, Robert, my father-in-law, stood on the threshold. His usually impeccable appearance was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed and puffy. Shocked, I led him to the living room. As he composed himself, Robert began to tell me a story that turned my world upside down. "The company, it wasn't always Patricia's," he began. "It belonged to my parents. But Patricia, she's always been ruthless. When my father got sick, she saw her chance. While I was away on a business trip, she manipulated and blackmailed him into signing over the company to her. Made herself executive director. By the time I got back, it was too late. I listened, stunned, as Robert poured out decades of pent-up pain and anger. For years, I've been collecting evidence of her misdeeds, he said, producing a thick folder from his briefcase. But I've been too much of a coward to do anything about it. Until now. With shaking hands, I opened the folder and began to read. What I saw made my blood run cold. Tax evasion. Hiring undocumented workers and paying them a pittance. Unsafe working conditions. Selling defective furniture at full price. The list of Patricia's crimes seemed endless. But the most shocking revelation came when I read about Angela, Tom's ex-wife. She had discovered Patricia's illegal practices while working in the production department. When she threatened to report it, Patricia had pushed her down a flight of stairs, causing severe injuries. Then she'd intimidated Angela into silence and forced Tom to divorce her. I looked up at Robert, my mind reeling. Why are you showing me this now? Robert's face crumpled. Because I can't take it anymore. What she did to you today, it was the last straw. I've been a coward for too long, allowing her to hurt people. To hurt my family. In that moment, looking at this broken man, I felt a strange mix of pity and resolve. Here, finally, was someone who understood the true nature of Patricia's cruelty. Someone who wanted to stand up to her. Robert, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, it's not too late. We can still fight back. We can stop her. He looked up at me, hope dawning in his tear-streaked face. You'd help me? After everything? I nodded, a fire igniting within me. Yes. It's time someone stood up to Patricia. It's time we fought for what's right. The days that followed my conversation with Robert were a whirlwind of activity. We contacted a reputable lawyer, Sarah Goldstein, who listened to our story with growing interest and outrage. What we have here, Sarah said, reviewing the documents, is a clear case of fraud, tax evasion, and labor law violations. Not to mention assault and intimidation. We have a strong case, but it won't be easy. Patricia won't go down without a fight. Sarah's words proved prophetic. When Patricia got wind of our plans, all hell broke loose. My phone buzzed constantly with threatening messages and calls. She turned our neighbors against me, spreading vicious lies about how I'd manipulated Robert and torn the family apart. Mark, predictably, sided with Patricia. He packed his bags and left, choosing his mother over the truth. To my surprise, Tom, the elder son, reached out to me. I believe you, he said, his voice heavy with years of suppressed pain. What Mom did to Angela, I can't forgive that. I want to help. The trial was grueling. Patricia's lawyer tried every trick in the book to discredit us. But Sarah was brilliant, methodically presenting evidence of Patricia's crimes. The turning point came when Angela, Tom's ex-wife, took the stand. Former workers, mostly undocumented immigrants, also testified about the terrible conditions they'd endured under Patricia's reign. Their stories of exploitation and fear painted a damning picture. In the end, justice prevailed. The court annulled the fraudulent will that had given Patricia control of the company. Robert was reinstated as the rightful owner. Patricia was ordered to pay massive fines for tax evasion and labor violations. The aftermath was swift. Robert divorced Patricia, leaving her only the house they'd shared. An audit of the company revealed even more financial irregularities, resulting in additional fines. Patricia was forced to sell the house to pay her debts to the IRS. As for me, I filed for divorce from Mark. He never reached out, never tried to reconcile. His silence spoke volumes about the man he'd become under his mother's influence. Robert, true to his word, offered me a position in the company's sales department. The work was challenging at first. I knew flowers, not furniture. But I threw myself into learning, determined to prove myself. Slowly but surely, I began to understand the intricacies of the furniture business, even finding ways to incorporate my knowledge of aesthetics from my florist days. Months passed, and life settled into a new normal. I was at a client's store one day, finalizing a big order, when I spotted them. Mark and Patricia, looking haggard and bitter, were arguing in a corner. "You useless, weak-willed idiot," Patricia hissed at Mark. "You can't even hold down a job without me holding your hand." For a moment, I felt a pang of pity. But then I remembered all the pain they'd caused, all the lives they'd tried to ruin. I turned away, pretending not to see them, and focused on my client. Driving back to the office, I couldn't help but smile. Life hadn't turned out the way I'd expected when I first met Mark in that flower shop. But here I was, free from Patricia's tyranny, carving out a new path for myself.